In a future episode, we'll hear from bee experts Liz Walsh and Lanie Bilodeau from the ARS Honeybee Breeding, Genetics, and Physiology Research Lab in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They talk about breeding bees that can adjust to climate change, resist pests and diseases, and forage on a variety of plants. In today's episode, I asked them if they had tips for making our home yards more bee-friendly. Walsh spoke first.
The first thing would be to point out that during a lot of the year, the average citizen in the US's yard is a pollinator desert because you have all that green grass and nothing else. By incorporating a lot of blooming plants that have different times when they're blooming and producing nectar, you can turn that pollinator desert into more of a grocery store. And that's what is needed for not just honeybees, but also bats and hummingbirds and native bees and all sorts of other pollinators.
How do I know what types of bees are in my garden or my lawn?
iNaturalist is a really, really neat place to catalog and utilize to identify a species of bees or other pollinators that you find in your area. There's also Bug Guide online to help you ID what species of insect you have. These are really neat ways to take a sort of survey of your own backyard.
Hi, this is Lanie. iNaturalist is fantastic, that one in particular, because it is classic citizen science. You enter whatever you have, whatever you see, if it's something that you want to identify or just something that you want to record in your yard, you just go in, you take a picture, and it will give you suggestions. And then other people will come in and will confirm what you have. When you get 3 identifications, 3 positive confirmations on what you have, then it's considered research grade. And that is used for diversity studies and things like that. So you're helping the research community, you're helping pollinators, you're helping everything by doing this.
How could home gardeners and homeowners protect bees in their area from the 4 Ps?
Pollinators are definitely beset by a lot of issues, including climate change, which we haven't turned into a P yet, but definitely contributes nonetheless to pollinator decline. Something that everyone can do is to help on that poor nutrition side of things by having a variety of floral resources that are appealing to pollinators, blooming throughout the foraging season. You, as just an average person, can help the pollinators, not just honeybees, but also butterflies and hummingbirds. You can find out very good plant species that are specific to your area by utilizing organizations like Pollinator Partnership or the Xerxes Society. Both have very, very good information and pamphlets on ecoregions and what plants are a good fit for those ecoregions.
I'll echo what Liz said, and that plant flowers and flowering trees also is another part of the landscape that will bloom as long as you can. That'll cover early spring into late fall or even winter. Like in the South, we have the camellias that bloom in the winter. So it's as wide of a berth as you can get and as diverse of a landscape as you can get. That really helps the pollinators. Try to do native plantings as much as you can because they're going to be locally adapted, and your plants are going to do well and your pollinators are going to also do well. There's lots of social media groups that are tied to native plants in your state, in your region, in your county. There's gardening groups. Get with your arboretums, go to your nature centers, go to your local nurseries because they're more likely to have local plants. And it's everything from letting the clover grow in your yard. Don't mow quite so often. There's blue-eyed grasses that go, and the bees will even go to those. And there's all kinds of things that they can take advantage of.
Dandelions are possibly the most pivotal early spring flower in many northern climates in the US. It's that first chance that bees and other pollinators have to forage on food. So I always advocate for letting the dandelions stay. Let them go to seed. It's for the best, I promise.
Another question that's come up before is how far can bees travel to my garden? How far do they usually travel, or will they travel to a garden?
yes, they will. Bees will prioritize a good nutrition that is closer to their colony, but they'll go as far as they need to go. Typically, we think of that distance as about 2 miles away from the colony, but there have been reports of bees traveling much further, even up to 4 miles away from the colony, in times where nutritional needs were not met by things that were closer to the colonies.
If I spray my garden, when's the best time to protect honeybees from the sprays? And what about grass too? If I spray my grass, should I be careful about any enhancements or weed killers?
Pesticides are one of the P's, and it's important to utilize them responsibly if you've determined that you need to utilize them at all. A way to decrease the effect that they might have on bees would be to time their use carefully. For instance, in a lot of agricultural settings, pesticide applicators will spray at night when the bees are not foraging to allow the plants time to take up the pesticide and to allow the bees the maximum amount of time for that pesticide to kind of break down or not be available when the bee next goes to that floral resource. If there's any way that you can avoid spraying plants that are blooming, that is definitely the best way to go.
Use products also that are going to be less toxic to bees. So use those safer soaps and things like that. Try to use the more organic type products. That'll be, if there is any error in application, then that will hopefully be less harmful to the pollinators.
There are non-pesticide-based ways to control pests. For instance, if you have an aphid problem in your garden, you can order ladybugs online and you can release ladybugs in your garden. And the ladybug nymphs in particular avidly eat the aphids. And so that's a really neat, creative, and relatively cheap way to control your aphid population with no pesticides at all and with only a positive impact on the environment.
Are there certain times of the day that honeybees are most active and that maybe I should avoid my garden so I don't interfere with gathering their food?
I think that it's wonderful to try and not bug the bees, as it were, but really human presence does not bug the bees when they're foraging. They're pretty focused on doing their thing, and you can observe them and enjoy their presence without interfering with their food collection.
In arid areas, let's say more out west and in the southwest, is it helpful to provide a water supply, any kind of water supply, or will they get enough water from just pollinating the flowers?
A water supply is a helpful thing. If you notice that bees are going to something like a pool or to your bird bath or something like that, it really is an indication that there's a need that isn't being met just naturally. And so you can help easily by providing a shallow water source for bees. And shallow because bees will drown. If you have, for instance, a drip container for pots that you'd place under a pot so the water doesn't go everywhere. I used to fill them with stones and just fill it up with water. So the bees were able to land on the stones and drink the water. And as the water level went down, there were just more places for them to land. So providing a watering resource like that can be a good thing for both honeybees as well as other animals.
My final question was, what other tips do they have for getting bees to your garden and for keeping them in your garden?
A non-pesticide approach for several different things may include soapy water. For instance, if you have a fungal problem that's on the exterior of a plant, sometimes soapy water will work. If you want to attract pollinators, including native bees, really it's maximizing the bloom period of things that are in your yard. And you can also clump floral resources because if you just have one single plant, that only provides so much nectar. I would also like to add in addition to our discussion before about dandelions, that weeds are only weeds. Doing nothing to control the weeds is actually an incredibly positive action to take.
There are some weed species that actually can be quite beautiful. Goldenrod is a tremendous resource for pollinators. They have huge flower bunches at the top, and they are just covered with pollinators if you actually let it go to bloom. Then there's some propagated plants that are non-native, things like celosia, that pollinators absolutely love. They're locally adapted. They're not going to spread like wildfire through everybody's yard and take over, because we don't want invasive species either. There are some really good plants like that are really great pollinator plants that are safe, that are not native. So there's lots of opportunity, but like Liz said, do them in bunches and cover that bloom period, and do flowering trees as well.
In next week's episode, we look at how some pesticides may be affecting the behaviors of honeybees. Talk to you then.